A cracked taillight was all it took. A single piece of broken plastic on a 1985 Ford Thunderbird set off a chain of events that left one man dead and destroyed multiple families. It also created one of the most baffling, unsolved disappearances in American criminal history. On an August evening in 1990, Adam Emery chased down the wrong car, attacked the wrong person, and then, after a jury told him he'd spend decades behind bars, he vanished completely. According to some accounts, both he and his wife jumped off a bridge, and his wife's skull turned up months later in a fisherman's net. Adam Emery himself has never been found, and though he's been declared legally deceased in Rhode Island, the FBI believes he's still a free man. August 31st, 1990, was supposed to be unremarkable. Adam Emery, 27, was out with his wife Elena, her sister Maria, and Maria's husband Ronnie. They had gone to Rocky Point Amusement Park in Warwick, Rhode Island. They'd picked up seafood from a restaurant along the coast, an informal celebration of the couple's second wedding anniversary. Emery worked in customer service at a local plastics company and was a graduate of Rhode Island College who'd previously served as a military policeman in the Rhode Island National Guard. He had no criminal record and was, by all accounts, generally well-liked and not quick to anger, but something changed that day. As they sat in Emery's Thunderbird, another vehicle sideswiped the car and sped off. Two cars left the lot at roughly the same time, and in the confusion, Maria pointed to a dark red 1977 Ford and insisted it was the one that struck them, to which Elena vehemently agreed. Adam, furious, threw the car into gear and gave chase, tailing the Ford for approximately 2 miles. Police would later confirm through paint chip analysis that the Ford wasn't the car that hit them. The 20-year-old behind its wheel, Jason Bass, had absolutely no idea why a stranger was pursuing him through the streets of Warwick. Jason Bass was a Providence native who worked in food service. He'd recently left a concession job at Rocky Point Amusement Park, the very place where the Emerys had just eaten dinner. That night he was driving with his cousin Joshua Post when Emery's Thunderbird appeared behind them. Bass was terrified and he tried to drive away, but Emery eventually cut him off, forcing the Ford onto the lawn of a residential property. What happened next took only seconds as Elena escalated the situation by handing her enraged husband a military-style double-edged knife. Emery approached Bass's car, shouting about the damage to his Thunderbird. When Bass, confused and frightened, put the car in reverse to escape, Emery lunged through the driver's side window and stabbed him directly through the heart. The car rolled to a stop against a boulder near the driveway of a local prison guard named Bruce Bishop. When Bishop came outside, Emery dropped the knife and admitted what he'd done. State Police Trooper Kevin Hopkins, the first officer to arrive, found Bass lying beside his car. Emery, for his part, had asked Bishop for a glass of water and was casually drinking it on the porch when the officer arrived. Emery was charged and held on a $270,000 bond. After 8 months in custody, his family posted bail, and he remained free for nearly 2 years before trial. He stayed employed, kept out of trouble, and showed up to every court appearance. He'd been offered a manslaughter plea deal, but rejected it, bizarrely insisting that he jumped through the window to attack Jason in self-defense. He claimed that when Bass reversed the car, he'd felt threatened and had no choice but to use the knife. I'm probably not going to shock anyone here, but the jury didn't buy it, and on November 10th, 1993, they returned a guilty verdict. He faced up to 25 years, and observers watched closely to see how he would react to what he clearly must have believed was an unexpected outcome. Jason Bass's family watched his face for any reaction when the verdict was read, but there was none. In a controversial decision, the judge allowed Emery to remain free on bail, pending formal sentencing a month later. He was permitted to leave the courthouse to get his affairs in order, and Adam and Elena walked out together at approximately 3 o'clock that afternoon. What happened over the next few hours reads more like something out of a true crime novel or a movie than real life. Around 3:30 p.m., the couple arrived at Kelly's Sporting Goods in Cranston, where they purchased black hooded sweatsuits, athletic socks, and 80 pounds of exercise weights. The store manager recalled Elena as chatty and smiling, while Adam seemed oddly bothered by the cost. Personally, I think this is a strange concern for someone supposedly about to jump off a bridge to his certain doom. They were next seen eating at a Burger King, where witnesses described them as calm and relaxed. At approximately 4:45 p.m., their Toyota Camry was spotted on the Claiborne-Pell-Newport Bridge, a massive span rising over 200 feet above Narragansett Bay. Motorists recalled seeing them walking along the pedestrian walkway. They were then seen driving away from the bridge, only to apparently return later that evening. Shortly before 7 o'clock, a bridge supervisor and a state trooper discovered the Camry abandoned in a westbound lane, engine running, headlights on. On the front seat lay cash, cut-up credit cards, and Adam's driver's license. On the back seat, neatly folded, were the clothes they'd worn to court that morning. Notes signed by both arrived in family mailboxes the next day, explaining why they had done it. In August 1994, a human skull was recovered from the bay and identified as Elena Emery's. Elena's younger brother, Dominic DeRocco, told the Associated Press that the couple had been in love and full of plans, and that they'd felt their lives ended the moment the conviction came down. Whatever happened on that bridge, Elena had gone into the water and Adam, by all evidence, had not. Not a bone, not a tooth, not a shred of his clothing was ever found. Rhode Island State Police turned to an unusual piece of evidence: courtroom footage captured by a news crew showing the couple in a whispered exchange after the verdict. Investigators brought in a lip-reading expert who, according to the state police, determined Elena had told her husband something to the effect of, "We'll do what we originally said." It confirmed the Emerys had a plan, but whether that was some sort of deranged pact or an escape scheme remains unknown. Sightings of Emery poured in from Connecticut in the weeks that followed. The day before his scheduled sentencing, the FBI received a tip he'd fled to Florida. Reported sightings then followed a geographic arc: Florida, then France, then Italy, where Elena had family ties. A Rhode Island judge declared Emery legally dead in 2004, but the FBI wasn't buying it. In 2010, they placed him on their wanted list, noting he may have traveled to Florida or Italy and should be considered armed and dangerous. In 2019, the Bureau released a new statement saying that they had made progress and that they believed he would be arrested shortly, but nothing more happened. From where I'm sitting, the idea that this was some kind of tragic pact just doesn't hold together. And when you strip it down to what we actually know, only one of them was confirmed to have actually ended up in the water, and that's the part that sticks with me. If this was truly a shared decision, there should have been two bodies. Instead, Elena's remains surface months later, and Adam Emery simply disappears. To me, it looks less like a pact and more like an exit strategy, something constructed to look final while giving Emery a way out. And if that's the case, then Elena becomes part of that plan in a much darker way. I think Emery did what he'd already shown he was capable of doing by perhaps having Elena jump or push her off and then walking away. Whatever the case, Elena clearly paid the price for placing so much faith and trust in Adam Emery. Personally, I believe Emery will be caught one day, since I suspect he's too narcissistic to actually pull the curtains on himself, though that's just my pop psychology take on it. Someone loved her. That's what Barstow Police Detective Keith Libby concluded after examining the remains. This wasn't a hunch born from sentiment, but rather a professional observation rooted in evidence. Her teeth showed years of consistent, high-quality dental care. Someone had taken this girl to the dentist, paid for fillings, made sure she was looked after, and yet, more than 15 years later, not a single person has come forward to claim her. She remains known as the Barstow Jane Doe, a designation that reduces a human life to a location and a placeholder. On February 10, 2010, a man was walking along Lenwood Road in Barstow, California, collecting aluminum cans. It was an unremarkable afternoon in the Mojave Desert, the kind of dry, sun-bleached day that makes the landscape feel emptied out and half forgotten. Lenwood Road sits just west of the Interstate 15 freeway, a heavily trafficked corridor that serves as the main artery between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. The man spotted a black backpack on the ground near the roadway, and he opened it. Inside, wrapped in 2 plastic shopping bags, one from Walgreens and the other from a grocery chain called Fiesta Foods, was the severed head of a young female. Police were called to the scene at approximately 2:55 in the afternoon, and an investigation rapidly got underway. An autopsy conducted on February 17th by the San Bernardino County Coroner's Office estimated the girl had died 3 to 4 days before her discovery. She was believed to be between 14 and 19 years old, either white or Hispanic, with straight, medium-length dark brown hair featuring reddish highlights. Her eyes were brown and her ears were pierced, though no earrings were found. Her dental records revealed extensive care, including numerous fillings, suggesting she'd had reliable access to health care at some point in her life. The rest of her body was never recovered, and because only her head was found, investigators couldn't determine her height, weight, or cause of death. No fingerprints from a potential suspect were obtainable from the remains, the backpack, or the plastic bags. The case was classified as a suspected killing, given the obvious evidence of foul play. Barstow sits at the junction of 3 major highways in the western Mojave Desert, a landscape that has long served as a grim repository for the unwanted dead. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department's cold case files stretch back decades, with victims found stabbed, strangled, shot, and dumped along the region's roads and desert flats. The stretches of Interstate 15 and Interstate 40 between Barstow and the Nevada state line have repeatedly yielded numerous John and Jane Doe cases. The FBI was brought in to help on the basis that the Jane Doe may have been the victim of a serial predator, potentially a long-haul trucker. Barstow, with its truck stops and its position along a major interstate corridor, fits this potential profile with unsettling precision. The plastic bags offered the most tangible investigative leads. The Walgreens bag was essentially untraceable given the pharmacy chain's ubiquity across the country. The Fiesta Foods bag was more interesting since Fiesta is a small grocery chain with limited locations. The closest store was in Bakersfield, California, roughly a 2-hour drive from Barstow. This suggested the perpetrator or the victim potentially had a connection to this area, but the lead never produced anything conclusive. Perhaps one of the most puzzling aspects of the investigation is the location where the backpack was left. Barstow is flanked by absolutely vast stretches of empty desert that are generally inhospitable and desolate. A person looking to conceal remains could have driven a short distance off the road and buried them in sand that might not be disturbed for years, if ever. Instead, the backpack was left near a well-traveled freeway in a residential area just on the edge of this obvious dumping ground. This has led some investigators to speculate that whoever did this wanted the head to be found, perhaps as a message or a deliberate display of power. In September 2021, a significant development emerged. and the San Bernardino County Coroner's Office revealed it was attempting to use genetic genealogy to solve her case. Testing confirmed that the Barstow Jane Doe had Hispanic ancestry with relatives in Mexico, as well as Italian heritage. As of the most recent public updates, this testing appears to still be ongoing, and you may notice my usage of the word appears here. Sometimes in these genetic genealogy cases, the connection revealed suggests that the family may have played some role in what happened to the victim. If the family still has a strong, ongoing connection to Mexico, any attempt to confirm the Jane Doe's identity could result in the perpetrator fleeing the country rapidly. There's also the potential that she was trafficked across the border and that her immediate family entirely resides in Mexico. This could create complications for identifying her, since genealogists would likely have to attempt to triangulate her identity using more distant relatives in the United States. Whoever walked into the Advance America Cash Advance store on Telegraph Road in Taylor, Michigan on November 12, 2013, didn't stumble into a crime of opportunity. He carried a .45 caliber semi-automatic fitted with a federally regulated suppressor, a device so uncommon in robberies that one detective said he'd never seen one used in a crime. The man rang a buzzer, was let in by the lone employee behind the counter, and within seconds produced his weapon. He shot her once in the chest, and then he walked behind the counter and shot her once more, this time in the head. He rummaged briefly through the office, grabbed less than $250 from the register, and left. The entire event lasted roughly 60 seconds. The woman who was slain was 30-year-old Chelsea Small, a single mother of two who wasn't even supposed to be working that day. Chelsea Small was born on August 9, 1983, and grew up in Taylor, a working-class suburb of Detroit in Michigan's Downriver region. Around 2002, she met a man named Rick Farley, and the two eventually had 2 children together, a son named Logan and a daughter named Jocelyn. Chelsea was, by every account, a devoted mother who organized her life around her children. She worked full-time at Advance America, a check-cashing and payday loan business in a busy strip mall along an 8-lane highway. She was simultaneously enrolled full-time at Wayne County Community College, where she'd made the dean's list while studying to become a physiotherapist. The reason Chelsea was at work on November 12th was bittersweet in the cruelest possible way. She'd swapped shifts with a coworker so she could celebrate her son Logan's 5th birthday the previous weekend. That trade meant Chelsea was alone in the store that Tuesday, and tragically, it also meant she died on her son's actual birthday. The Advance America store had standard security measures for a business such as this. Doors were locked at all times, requiring customers to ring a buzzer for entry, and there were surveillance cameras as well as a silent panic alarm behind the counter. Around noon, Chelsea buzzed a man into the store, and there appears to have been a brief exchange between them, though the system recorded no audio. Chelsea managed to hit the panic button, triggering a silent alarm to police, but it didn't save her. Detectives described his demeanor as disturbingly calm, and there was no rush, no panic, and no hesitation. After killing Chelsea, he spent a handful of seconds looking through the office, took cash from the register, and walked out. He either didn't find or deliberately ignored larger sums stored in a back room. Taylor police arrived minutes later and had to force their way in because the doors were still locked. On its surface, the crime appeared to be a straightforward robbery gone fatally wrong, but from the earliest stages of the investigation, details nagged at detectives. The suppressor was the most glaring anomaly since silencers are tightly regulated under the National Firearms Act and are exceedingly rare in armed robberies. Its presence suggested a level of forethought and sophistication far beyond a typical holdup, with a detective noting that they're more associated with professional hitmen than anything else. Then there was the question of motive and sequence, since the financial payoff was absolutely minimal compared to this disturbing crime. Detectives questioned the motive and why Chelsea was shot almost immediately, especially since she could have opened the safe that contained a large amount of cash. The lead detective on the case has questioned whether the entire event was a professional hit designed to look like a robbery gone wrong. Personally, though, I have to question this, since the criminal clearly knew he would be on a surveillance camera and made little attempt to hide his identity. Speaking of that, surveillance footage gave investigators a reasonably clear look at the perpetrator. Taylor police described him as a white male, estimated between 35 and 50 years old, approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall, with shoulder-length brown hair. He walked with an irregular gait, a kind of hunch or curve in his upper back. His clothing appeared to be work-style attire, cargo pants and light-colored shoes, which detectives speculated might be recognizable to someone in the same trade. He wore a ball cap and sunglasses, and investigators believed his baggy clothing was deliberately chosen to disguise his build. Some who reviewed the footage believe the man was wearing gloves, which could explain why no usable fingerprints were recovered, despite him touching multiple surfaces. Personally, having looked at the surveillance footage, his hands appear to be noticeably whiter than the skin on his face. Notably, the bullets recovered from the scene were entered into a national ballistics database, but no matches came back. Police investigated Chelsea's personal life thoroughly, and her ex-partner was questioned and ultimately cleared. Nothing in her background suggested enemies or involvement in anything that might have made her a target. Hundreds of tips came in over the years, but none produced a breakthrough. Investigators have explored every theory, from the killer being a gun enthusiast who frequents ranges and shows, to the possibility of security, military, or militia training. The case's proximity to two major interstates has also fueled speculation that he could be a long-haul truck driver living anywhere in the country. However, aside from that very tangential relationship, there's nothing to suggest he was employed as a trucker at the time of this crime. Whoever he is, he walked into a strip mall in broad daylight, ruthlessly eliminated a young mother in front of a camera, and vanished. More than a decade later, Chelsea's children are growing up without her, and the man on the surveillance tape remains at large. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with my usual quick reminder to hit the like and subscribe buttons and ding that notification bell. Also, don't forget to hit that share button and send this video to your friends and family that enjoy unexplained mysteries. In 1973, 4 hostages walked out of a bank vault in Stockholm, Sweden, after 6 days of captivity, and then did something that stunned the world. They refused to testify against their captors, and not only that, some of them also raised money for their legal defense. One of them reportedly became engaged to one of the men who'd held a revolver to her head. The police, the prosecutors, and the public couldn't make sense of it. How could anyone develop affection for the person threatening to end them? That question launched one of the most recognizable and most misunderstood terms in modern psychology: Stockholm Syndrome. It's a phrase that gets tossed around in true crime podcasts, courtroom dramas, and pop culture debates with alarming casualness, often stripped of its original context. But the real story behind the term, and the science that's grown up around it, is far stranger and more unsettling than most people realize. The event that gave Stockholm Syndrome its name began on August 23, 1973, when Jan Erik Olsson, a convicted criminal on prison leave, walked into the Sveriges Kreditbanken. He took 4 employees hostage and demanded, among other things, the release of his friend Clark Olofsson from prison. Surprisingly, the Swedish authorities complied, sending Olofsson into the bank to join the standoff. What followed was a tense 6-day siege that captivated the Swedish public and baffled law enforcement. During those 6 days, the hostages began to exhibit behavior no one anticipated, and they expressed fear of the police rather than their captors. They spoke to Prime Minister Olof Palme by phone and criticized the government's handling of the situation. Kristen Enmark, one of the hostages, later described feeling safer with Olsen and Olofsson than with the authorities trying to rescue them. After the ordeal ended with a tear gas assault by police, the hostages continued to defend the two men publicly. They visited them in prison. They expressed gratitude for small kindnesses, being allowed to move, being given food, being spoken to like human beings. Psychiatrist Niels Bierot, who consulted for Swedish police during the crisis, described the hostages' seemingly irrational attachment. He gave the concept an extremely complex Swedish name, and I'll spare you my butchering of the language, but the concept later entered English as Stockholm Syndrome. However, this psychiatrist never examined the hostages directly, a fact that's drawn criticism from researchers and from the hostages themselves. Kristen Enmark has spoken publicly about feeling that the label pathologized her survival instincts and dismissed her perspective on what she went through. She's argued that her responses during the siege were rational assessments of danger, not symptoms of a disorder, but more on that in a moment. Regardless of the debate surrounding the original case, the psychological phenomenon described by Stockholm Syndrome has been observed in a wide range of captivity situations. At its core, the concept describes a process in which hostages or other victims develop positive feelings toward their captors, sometimes to the point of identifying with their goals. Researchers have proposed several mechanisms to explain this seemingly highly unusual response. The most widely cited explanation involves a survival strategy rooted in evolutionary psychology. When a person is placed in a situation of extreme powerlessness and perceives a genuine threat to their life, any small act of kindness from the captor can be psychologically amplified. The captive's brain, operating under intense stress, begins to interpret these gestures as evidence of a bond. This isn't conscious manipulation on the part of the hostage, but rather a deep automatic response that serves to reduce terror and increase perceived chances of survival. 4 conditions have been commonly identified as necessary for this attachment to develop. The captive must perceive a genuine threat to their survival, and simply being in a highly dangerous situation isn't enough. They must perceive some amount of kindness from the captor within the context of terror. They must be isolated from all outside perspectives, and they must believe escape is impossible. When all 4 conditions are present, the psychological ground is fertile for the kind of bond that outside observers find so difficult to understand. It's worth noting that Stockholm Syndrome isn't recognized as a formal diagnosis. It exists in a gray area, widely referenced in clinical literature and popular discourse, but without standardized diagnostic criteria. Some researchers have argued it would be more accurately described as a trauma response or a subset of complex post-traumatic stress disorder rather than a standalone syndrome. The concept has been applied far beyond hostage situations, and it's been invoked to explain behavior in cases ranging from cult membership to prisoner of war scenarios. The argument is that the same dynamics, extreme power imbalance, isolation, intermittent kindness, and perceived inability to escape can produce similar bonding effects. One of the most famous cases linked to Stockholm Syndrome is that of Patty Hearst, the newspaper heiress kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army in 1974. After weeks in captivity, Hearst appeared to join her captors, adopting a new name and participating in a bank robbery. Her defense argued she'd been brainwashed, a claim the prosecution firmly rejected. Hearst was convicted, but later had her sentence commuted by President Jimmy Carter and received a full pardon from President Bill Clinton. Her case became a lightning rod for debates about free will, coercion, and the limits of personal responsibility under conditions of extreme duress. The kidnapping of Natascha Kampusch in Austria presents another frequently cited example. Kampusch was abducted at age 10 in 1998 and held by Wolfgang Priklopil for over 8 years. After escaping in 2006, she expressed complex emotions about her captor, including grief when she learned he'd pulled the curtains on himself after her escape. Some interpreted her response as evidence of Stockholm Syndrome. Kampusch herself has rejected that framing, arguing that her feelings were a natural consequence of the reality she'd inhabited. Stockholm Syndrome has faced significant academic criticism. One major objection is that the evidence base is remarkably thin. A widely cited 2008 study analyzing over 400 hostage cases found that the supposed syndrome appeared in fewer than 8% of them. This calls into question whether it represents a reliable psychological pattern or simply an unusual response elevated to the status of a general theory. There's also the problem of the psychiatrist's original methodology, or lack thereof, in quote-unquote diagnosing the syndrome, since he never interviewed the hostages. He observed the crisis from the outside and applied a label based on behavior he found inexplicable. Critics have noted this isn't how psychological conditions are typically identified, and that building a widely used clinical concept on such a foundation is scientifically questionable. The hostages' own accounts suggest their behavior was more nuanced than the Stockholm Syndrome narrative implies. They feared police intervention because they believed a forceful rescue could get them eliminated, not by their captors, but by their rescuers. Their cooperation was strategic, not pathological, since their goals fundamentally were aligned with those of the bank robbers. Both the captives and the robbers wanted to escape the situation unharmed, and forming an uneasy alliance may have been a logical thing to do, rather than a pathological thing. Despite these criticisms, the concept continues to serve an important function in how we understand human resilience. Even if the term is imperfect, it points toward an uncomfortable truth about human psychology. That under conditions of extreme stress and captivity, the mind can form attachments that defy logic, apparent self-interest, and even self-preservation. On the evening of February 2, 2008, a 24-year-old real estate agent walked into a vacant house in one of Victoria, British Columbia's quietest suburbs. She intended to show it to a wealthy couple she'd never met, the exact sort of individuals who she expected to purchase the home. She'd told her boyfriend and her father that something about the clients felt off, but she went anyway. Within 10 minutes of stepping through the front door, Lindsay Buziak was dead, stabbed repeatedly in an upstairs bedroom, while her boyfriend sat in the car waiting for her to finish. The supposed buyers vanished without a trace. They left behind no fingerprints, no genetic evidence, no weapon, and no motive that anyone has ever been able to prove. This is one of Canada's most chilling unsolved cold cases, a narrative where everything we know only deepens the mystery of what we don't. Lindsay Buziak was born on November 2, 1983 in Calgary, Alberta, a province in Canada known for its vast quantities of oil. Raised by her parents, Jeff and Evelyn, alongside her sister Sarah, she was described by those who knew her as energetic, ambitious, and personable. After relocating to Victoria, she began building a career in real estate, joining a RE/MAX office where she worked alongside her boyfriend, Jason Zalo, and his mother, Shirley Zalo. By early 2008, Lindsay had made a promising start in the industry. She was still junior, but she was driven and eager to prove herself. Her father, himself a real estate agent in Calgary, was a close confidant, and Lindsay spoke with him regularly about her career and personal life. By late 2007, she'd been telling him the relationship with Jason was faltering. She felt he lacked ambition, and friends knew she was seriously considering a breakup. Despite those doubts, she stayed as the new year began, a decision that indirectly placed her directly in the path of whoever was planning what came next. In late January 2008, Lindsay received a call on her personal cell from a woman claiming to be house hunting with her husband. The caller said her husband had just been transferred to Victoria, that they needed to move quickly, and that their budget was roughly $1 million. She wanted a vacant, move-in ready property with at least 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a separate area for a housekeeper. For a young agent still building her client list, it was the kind of opportunity that could define a career. But Lindsay was uneasy from the start, since a number of things simply didn't add up. The woman spoke English with an accent Lindsay described to her father as sounding somewhat Spanish, but not quite right, as though it might be affected to hide her real voice. She also questioned why this wealthy client had reached out to her specifically, a junior agent, using her personal number. The caller claimed a previous client had referred her, but Lindsay wasn't convinced, and she shared her concerns with Jason and her father. Notably, it appears that she didn't name-drop who this client was, another massive red flag. Everyone involved found the inquiry suspicious and felt it was too good to be true. Jason nonetheless encouraged her to keep the appointment because of the commission a $1 million sale would generate, and offered to wait outside in his car during the showing. What neither of them knew was that the phone used to make the call was a prepaid burner, purchased at a Vancouver convenience store weeks earlier under a fictitious name. It had been activated less than 48 hours before Lindsay's slaying, and had only ever been used to contact one person: Lindsay. That Saturday afternoon, Lindsay and Jason went for a late lunch at a restaurant called Sauce, paying their bill around 4:30 before departing separately. Lindsay appears to have gone home to change before the 5:30 showing. Jason drove to an auto detailing shop to pick up a colleague, Cohen Oatman. Security footage from the shop confirmed they left together at approximately 5:30 p.m. The property was at 1702 D'Souza Place in the Saanich suburb of Gordon Head, a small cul-de-sac with just 4 houses. The street was named after developer Joe D'Souza, a friend and business associate of Jason's mother. D'Souza had been on site supervising construction just an hour before the attack, and the area was considered extremely safe. At around 5:30 p.m., witnesses observed a man and woman walking up the cul-de-sac. The man was described as white, roughly 6 feet tall, with dark hair and a light jacket. The woman was described as white, mid-30s to 40s, with short blonde hair and a distinctive dress, black with thick white and red or pink swirls. Witnesses watched Lindsay greet the couple with a formal handshake, suggesting she hadn't met them before. Jason and Oatman arrived at roughly 5:40 p.m. Jason saw what appeared to be figures near the entrance, assumed Lindsay was with her clients, and parked nearby to wait. He texted her asking if she was okay, but she never opened the message. By about 6:05 p.m., growing worried, he approached the front door and found it locked, unusual for a property being shown. He called the cops, then had Oatman climb the backyard fence to access an unlocked rear patio door. Jason ran upstairs and found Lindsay lying on her back in the master bedroom in a pool of blood, her skin already cold to the touch. The autopsy determined Lindsay had been stabbed multiple times. There were no defensive wounds, indicating she'd likely been attacked from behind without warning. The coroner placed the time of death at approximately 5:40 p.m., roughly within 10 minutes of entering the house. Nothing was stolen, and she hadn't been subjected to any other forms of assault beyond the stabbing. It was targeted, deliberate violence against a junior real estate agent who had no known enemies. Saanich police reported virtually no forensic evidence left behind, no usable DNA, no fingerprints. The perpetrators had been extraordinarily careful, and the weapon used was never recovered. The burner phone was never used again, but a second prepaid phone was later identified, apparently used to check the first phone's voicemail. Jason and Oatman were questioned but cleared by the time-stamped security footage, which proved they couldn't have committed the crime. Jason and Oatman both cooperated fully, submitted to multiple interviews, and passed a series of polygraph tests. By February 2009, Saanich police publicly stated neither of the men was considered a suspect. Jason's family was also investigated, partly due to their connections to the D'Souza Place development, but police stated no member of the Xylo family was considered a suspect. Investigators pursued multiple theories, and one early lead focused on a cartel connection and one of the largest busts in Canadian history. In December 2007, Lindsay had visited Calgary and attempted to contact an acquaintance linked to her ex-boyfriend. On January 22, 2008, less than 2 weeks before her slaying, Alberta authorities executed the province's largest ever drug bust, and that acquaintance was arrested as a major participant. The theory emerged that Lindsay may have been eliminated by a cartel faction that mistakenly believed she was a police informant. Investigators dismissed this, and Lindsay had no known involvement in criminal activity and wasn't an informant. Experts on cartel hits also weighed in, noting that these sorts of hits are either brutal in the extreme or extremely professional, with virtually nothing in the space in between. The Lindsay Buziak case is disturbing because of how much is known. We know she was specifically targeted, and that a man and woman posed as home buyers using a burner phone registered to a fake name. The perpetrators were well dressed and appeared to be in their mid-30s to 40s. The attack was swift, the perpetrators escaped without a trace, and the weapon was never found. A significant degree of planning went into this. The burner phone, the fictitious identity, the choice of a vacant house on a dead-end street. There's a natural instinct to try to make the slaying of Lindsay Buziak fit into some familiar category, but we know it wasn't a jealous partner, a bad relationship, and we're pretty sure it wasn't some kind of drug connection gone wrong. The deeper I look at the facts, the less it feels like a personal crime, and the more it starts to feel like something colder. This wasn't random, and it definitely wasn't sloppy, at least in the planning, and someone went to real effort here to target Lindsay, or a young female real estate agent more generally. They bought a burner phone weeks in advance, created a fake identity, and specifically targeted a young real estate agent they could get a loan inside an empty house. They showed up as a normal-looking couple, nothing that would raise alarm bells, and within minutes of getting her inside, it was over. There was no struggle, no defensive wounds, no evidence left behind, suggesting that they had the entire act planned out in advance. Then, just like that, they disappeared without leaving behind any meaningful trace of evidence. That part is hard to ignore since most people who commit such an act leave something behind, some small piece of evidence to indicate who they are, despite the preparation they took. Even when they plan it, something slips, but here nothing did, suggesting it wasn't this couple's first rodeo. And the fact that there were two of them matters as well, and makes the whole scenario that much more unusual. A man and a woman working together isn't common, but when you do see it, it usually points to something more deliberate. I'm not saying this is definitely the work of a seemingly normal couple that moonlight as serial predators, but it doesn't feel like a one-off either. Notably, I also think it's interesting that they targeted a young real estate agent who essentially couldn't turn down the business. She more or less had no choice but to agree to meet the couple, even though there were red flags, since the payoff could have made her career. In that sense, I don't believe that they targeted Lindsay because they knew her specifically, but because they were looking to target a certain category of person. I theorize that they wanted to find a young female real estate agent who posed no physical threat to the couple if things went off the rails. Another possibility that doesn't get talked about enough is that the attackers perhaps weren't local at all. Absolutely everything about this feels transient, from the burner phone to the fake identity to the quick in and out operation. There were no sightings afterward, and no loose threads that could be tugged upon by investigators. It's entirely possible they were just passing through, maybe even from outside North America altogether. If they were experienced and mobile, Canada could have been just one stop on some sort of disturbing world tour. Anyway, unfortunately, given the amount of time that's passed and the fact that there's absolutely no forensic evidence, I suspect this case will forever remain an unsolved mystery.